I wore a 30-year-old Carhartt jacket to the mediation that morning. The elbows were soft from use, the color had gone from brown to something closer to dust, and the zipper on the left pocket had stopped working sometime around 2009. My daughter-in-law looked at it the way you look at roadkill, quickly, then away, like she didn't want the image to stay. I didn't say anything. I just set my coffee cup down on the conference table and pulled out the chair across from her attorney. She leaned over and whispered something to him. He smiled. Not a real smile, the kind that's really just a way of showing teeth. I was 63 years old. I had driven to that office in a 2004 Ford F-150 with a crack in the windshield I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I was wearing boots I'd had resoled 3 times, and I was about to represent myself in a family mediation that my daughter-in-law's legal team clearly believed would last about 45 minutes before I signed whatever they put in front of me. I understood why they thought that. What I didn't do was correct them. My son's name is Bryce. He's 34 now, though he'll always be about 8 years old in some part of my brain. The part that still sees him standing in the backyard trying to teach himself to whistle, cheeks puffed out, completely serious about it, not making a sound. He got his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a blessing or a curse depending on the day. He married Tiffany 6 years ago. I tried to like her. I want to be honest about that. I didn't walk into their relationship looking for problems. She was smart, she was pretty, she had a laugh that filled up a room. In the beginning I thought she was good for him. She had ambition. Bryce had always been a little too comfortable, a little too willing to let life happen to him. She pushed him. That part I respected. But ambition has a shadow side, and over the years I started to see it. It wasn't one thing. It was never one thing with people like that. It was 100 small things, each one easy to explain away. The way she introduced Bryce at her work functions as her husband, but said quickly, almost like a footnote. The way she talked about money in front of his friends, casually mentioning what things cost, comparing. The way she started calling his old college buddies those guys, with a particular flatness in her voice. And then there was my granddaughter. Rosie was 4 when this all started. She had the same dark hair as Bryce at that age, and she was already asking questions that made adults stop what they were doing and actually think. She was the kind of kid who made you feel like the world was still full of things worth paying attention to. Tiffany wanted to move her to a private school across the county. Not because the local school was bad, it wasn't. Bryce had gone there himself, it was fine, but because Tiffany had decided that where Rosie went to school was a statement about the kind of family they were. She'd gotten friendly with some women from her cycling class, the kind of women who talk about their children's enrichment programs the way generals talk about troop movements, and somewhere along the way she'd adopted the same vocabulary. Bryce told me about it on the phone one Sunday. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She says we can afford it, he said. Can you? A pause. Technically. What does technically mean? Another pause. It means we'd have to stop putting anything in savings for about 2 years. And my truck needs new brakes. I didn't tell him what I thought. He didn't ask. But I made a note of it, the way you make notes of things you hope you're wrong about. I wasn't wrong. The divorce came out of nowhere the way divorces usually do, which is to say it came out of everywhere, slowly, and then all at once. Bryce called me on a Tuesday night in November. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that gets into the walls of the house, and I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of decaf I'd probably made too weak. She's leaving, he said. I didn't say I'm sorry. I didn't say I saw this coming. I said, where's Rosie? Asleep? Okay. Do you need me to come over? He said no. Then he said yes. I was in the truck with my coat half on before I'd even hung up. I won't go into all of it. Some of it isn't mine to tell. But the broad shape of it was this. Tiffany had met someone at her firm. A partner. She'd been seeing him for several months. She wanted the house, primary custody of Rosie, and child support calculated on Bryce's salary, which at the time was $71,000 a year as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction company. What she did not know, what her attorney did not know, because Bryce hadn't thought to mention it, and I certainly hadn't gone around advertising it, was that 2 years earlier, I had transferred the entirety of my business holding into a generation-skipping trust with Bryce and Rosie as the primary beneficiaries. Let me back up. I spent 31 years building a commercial refrigeration company in eastern Tennessee. Started it with a business partner named Al in a rented warehouse with second-hand equipment and a used van that broke down. So often we started keeping a sleeping bag in the back for what happened on the highway. Al was the sales guy. I was the one who understood how the systems worked. We grew it slowly, the way things that last tend to grow. By the time we sold it, we had 68 employees, contracts with 3 regional grocery chains, and a reputation in the industry that had taken most of those 31 years to earn. The sale closed for 4 million. I paid my taxes. I paid off the small amount remaining on my house. I took Al to dinner at a steakhouse in Knoxville, and we sat there for 3 hours talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Then I called an estate attorney in Nashville, a woman named Sandra, who came highly recommended and turned out to be worth every penny of her fees, and I told her I wanted to protect what I'd built so that my son and my granddaughter would have something real when it came time. The trust she structured was not complicated, but it was carefully done. The assets were real property, a managed investment portfolio, and a small amount of cash. None of it showed up on any document connected to Bryce's name. The trust paid no income to him. He had no access to it during my lifetime without my agreement. It was mine, legally and completely, and it was structured specifically so that it would not appear as a marital asset in any proceeding involving him. This is not loophole lawyering. Sandra explained it to me carefully, and I asked her twice if we were doing anything that would embarrass me later, and she said no. It's simply how generation-skipping trusts work when they're set up correctly, before any dispute exists, by the grantor rather than the beneficiary. Tiffany's attorney had done a financial discovery on Bryce. He was thorough. He found everything connected to Bryce, the salary, the 401k, the joint savings account. He found nothing else, because there was nothing else to find under Bryce's name. He had not thought to look at mine. The mediation was her idea. She wanted to avoid court, she said. She wanted to keep things civil, she said. What she actually wanted, I think, was a setting where a 63-year-old man in a beat-up jacket would feel outmatched and sign something before he fully understood what he was signing. I had asked Bryce to let me come. He was reluctant. He had his own attorney, a decent young man named, well, I'll call him Bryce's lawyer, because what he was called doesn't matter much, who had advised him on the custody terms and the support calculations. Bryce's lawyer didn't know about the trust either. Bryce had never mentioned it to him because Bryce, honestly, had half forgotten about it. He knew it existed. He knew I'd done something with the money from the sale. He didn't know the details. I knew the details. I sat down at that conference table and I folded my hands and I listened. Tiffany's attorney was a man named, I'll call him her attorney, who had the smooth, unhurried manner of someone who wins by making the other side feel like they've already lost. He was good at his job. I'll give him that. He walked through their position methodically. Primary custody with Tiffany, standard visitation for Bryce, child support based on the income differential, the house to go to Tiffany since she was the primary parent, a small buyout of Bryce's equity. At one point he mentioned, almost parenthetically, that the financial disclosure had been thorough and that the support figure was calculated to reflect the realistic assets available to the father's household. He looked at me when he said it, not at Bryce, at me. And then Tiffany said something that I think she had been saving. His father drives a truck from 20 years ago, she said, to no one in particular, to the room. He showed up today in a jacket with a broken zipper. She said it lightly, the way you say something you want everyone to hear, but want to be able to deny you meant. I think we all understand the financial picture here. I looked at the jacket. I looked at the zipper. I said. Her attorney set down his pen. Perhaps we should let the documents speak. That sounds fine, I said. I actually brought some documents of my own. The room got quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of attention. The quiet of mild, tolerant amusement. The kind of quiet that says, go ahead, old man. I reached into the bag I'd set beside my chair. The same canvas bag I'd been using since the company. The one with the logo from a refrigeration trade show in 2011. And I set a folder on the table. This is the trust instrument, I said. It was established 2 years ago by me, as grantor, with my son and granddaughter as remainder beneficiaries. The corpus of the trust is currently valued at approximately $3.8 million. I slid it across the table toward her attorney. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up right away. The trust is not a marital asset, I continued. The beneficiaries have no current access to it and receive no income from it. I want to be clear about that because I know it matters for the support calculation. I paused. However, it does speak to the long-term financial picture of this family. which I believe was the topic on the table. Her attorney picked up the folder. He opened it. He read. I watched his face do the thing faces do when a calculation turns out wrong. Not dramatic, just a small stillness, a recalibration behind the eyes. Tiffany was looking at me, not the way she'd looked at my jacket, differently. I should note, I said, that I also retained my own counsel before today. She reviewed the trust documentation and confirmed there's no issue with its structure or its exclusion from the marital estate. I set a second page on the table. Sandra's letter, signed and dated, one paragraph, plain language. I'm not here to complicate anything. I'm here because my granddaughter's future is in this room, and I wanted to make sure the full picture was available. Bryce was looking at me from across the table. He had the expression of a man who has just realized the quiet, beat-up old truck his father drives has a different engine than it appears to have. I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold by then, but I drank it anyway. I want to tell you what happened next in the way it actually happened, which was not dramatic. Real things usually aren't. Her attorney asked for a recess. We took 20 minutes. I sat in the waiting area and looked at a painting of a mountain lake that had probably been chosen specifically to be inoffensive. When we went back in, the terms on the table had changed. The custody proposal shifted. Shared custody, more equitable split, real consideration for Bryce's involvement in Rosie's life, rather than the every other weekend arrangement they'd initially offered. The house was still complicated, but the buyout number had changed too. More honest, more proportionate to what Bryce had actually put in. What didn't change was the child support. I hadn't expected it to. That was based on income and income alone, and Bryce's income was what it was. I hadn't brought the trust to change that number. I'd brought it to change the temperature in the room. It worked. I don't say that with satisfaction exactly. It's hard to feel satisfied about something that only had to happen because other things didn't. If Tiffany had been different, or if the marriage had gone differently, none of us would have been in that room. Rosie would be growing up with both her parents in the same house, and I'd be the grandfather who shows up for Sunday dinners and fixes things that break and pretends not to notice when she feeds her vegetables to the dog. That's not what happened. But what I did have, walking out of that building into the November cold, was the knowledge that my granddaughter's life was not going to be arranged around her mother's convenience and her mother's attorney's spreadsheets. She would have her father, really have him, half the week, every major holiday alternating, both parents at school events, both parents with a legal say in where she went and how she was raised. That mattered more than anything else in that folder. Bryce walked out behind me. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment. His truck was parked next to mine. His was newer, a 2019, but he'd gotten it used and the back bumper had a dent in it from a parking lot somewhere. He said, "Dad, just that." I said, "Yeah." He looked at the ground for a moment and then looked up. "You let her say that. About the jacket." "About the truck, sure, you could have said something." "I could have," I agreed. He thought about that. "You wanted her to think you were." "I wanted the room to think what it thought," I said. "That's all. People tell you a lot about themselves when they think you can't do anything about it." He was quiet. Then, "How long have you been sitting on that trust?" 2 years. "And you never mentioned it? Didn't seem like the right time?" Then it was the right time. He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, more the way you shake your head at something that is what it is. "I didn't know, Dad. I want you to know that. I didn't know you had all that. I wasn't hiding anything from her." "I know that," I said. "That's partly why it worked." We stood there a little longer. A car went by. Somewhere down the block, someone was running a leaf blower, even though most of the trees were bare already. "She's going to be okay," I said. "Rosie." He looked at me. He looked the way he used to look when he was about 8 years old, trying to decide whether to believe something was going to be okay. He was always the kind of kid who needed the truth more than the comfort. His mother always said that about him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think so." I drove home on Route 11W, the long way, the way that takes you past the farms, and the old hardware store that's been there since before I was born, and the Methodist church where my wife's funeral was held 11 years ago. I don't always take that road. But sometimes I do. I thought about what I was going to tell Rosie someday. Not now. Not for a long time. But someday when she was old enough to ask the right questions, and young enough to still want to hear the answers, I thought about what I would tell her. I wouldn't tell her about the jacket, or the trust, or the look on her mother's attorney's face when he opened that folder. Those are grown-up things, and they aren't the point. The point is something her grandmother used to say, which is that the man who needs everyone to know what he has usually doesn't have as much as he thinks. And the man who lets people think what they want, and then waits, usually has more. I'm not sure I've always lived up to that. I've had my moments of wanting to be seen, of wanting the recognition, of doing things the visible way when the invisible way would have served better. I'm human. I'm not a parable. But I've tried. I've tried to be the kind of person who builds things that last and lets the building speak for itself. The company was that. The trust was that. The jacket is that, in its own small way, a 30-year-old Carhartt that has outlasted 3 trucks and 2 presidents, and one very well-dressed attorney who thought he had me figured out before I'd finished my coffee. Rosie stayed with me for the weekend, about 3 weeks after the mediation. We made pancakes on Saturday morning, the kind with blueberries, and she told me very seriously that I was using too much batter per pancake and that the ideal size was the same as a CD, Grandpa. I asked her how she knew what a CD was. She said her dad had shown her one. We ate the oversized pancakes anyway. They were good. After breakfast, she went and sat on the front porch with a book she was reading. She was reading chapter books now, real ones, thick paperbacks with small print. And I stood in the kitchen washing the pan and looking out the window at her. She was sitting exactly the way her father used to sit. Same posture. Same way of holding the book with both hands. Same small frown of concentration. A quiet life is not a small life. It just looks that way to people who've never learned the difference.